fashionably late as always.
No, it's all right.
That's all right.
We've been discussing,
Fashionably late was 20 minutes ago.
Oh,
Shots fired. Ouch.
So I'm just going to introduce you all just so that everyone knows who we all are. So I'm obviously saisieplums, and I created the character of Agnes. We then have Fluffy Dino, who created Nigel. Do you want to say hi?
Hi.
And then we have Warden of the Knoll, who created Theo, or Theodore Fotheringham is his longer name. Do you want to say hi?
Good evening. Good evening.
And then we also have Lebenlock, who created William, or Bill, as he's also known as.
yo.
We also have our Game Master, or Arcane.
The keeper of the arcane lore.
That's it, thank you. Guru.
Oh.
There's also obviously the NPCs and things like that, so obviously would have been Seamus and all the other characters. We've also got Nappa with us, who created the character Sam, who is actually a character in our later stories, but we just decided to have him over as well, since he's great to talk to. Say hello, Nappa.
Hello, hello, hello.
So, I just wanted to kind of get started with just a nice kind of icebreaker, just something that we can kind of all chat about. How do you all feel about, obviously, we've not done any of our sessions in, God, months now, I think.
In at least 2 months or so.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
how are you all feeling about missing out on the game sessions?
I'll miss it.
You miss it?
Yeah. Come on,
Oh.
Leb. How many pages of notes did you take for this question?
I know.
Thanks for that. I mean, obviously I left quite a bit before we stopped having the games, so
Well,
not really sure I should answer that one.
Well,
No, you
you're
can
welcome
still-
to rejoin at any time, or even if you want to sit in, you can. That's absolutely fine with me.
you can still answer. I mean, I know obviously that you left for your own reasons, but I mean, do you still miss some of the sessions that we've had? I mean, obviously we've had great laughter within our sessions.
Oh yeah, I mean I like being able to chill out with you guys, but a mixture of work and all that just gets in the way every other week. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I think that's kind of happened to all of us, to be honest.
yeah, work and Corona.
Yeah. That fun thing.
We're not using the C word.
Not the C word.
I'll blank it
Oh, okay.
out.
Leaps.
don't want to timestamp the.
I'll blank it out and I'll put
Podcast.
the word Christmas over it.
Oh no, it's the
That's the other
pestilence.
C word.
Exactly. That's what makes it more fun.
Damn you, Christmas!
What about you, Warden? How have you been feeling not being able to play the sessions?
Yeah, it's definitely been missing it. It was always a good little kind of break from the usual pace of the week. Good to kind of the game always kind of forced you to think outside the box, I found. So
Yeah.
it was always good to think creatively and kind of work with everyone in the team to try and work stuff out. It was enjoyable.
I have to admit, for someone who's never played a game like this, I always feel like you actually did really quite well in trying to think creatively, trying to think outside the box. So,
Definitely more
Thank
than
you.
I tried to.
I feel like, Warden, you've really grown as a player. I mean, from one of our earliest sessions, I still have a laugh about the interaction you had with the drug dealer in it. Where you essentially walked straight up to him and asked him, what are your experiences with this drug?
in broad
In broad
daylight.
daylight in the middle of the campus.
Wow.
Which I don't
Oh,
know if
yeah.
any of you read my wee short story, Diary of a Mobster.
Not yet. No, we mean
That's okay. I only put it up recently, but that does have that scene in it. Just briefly mentioned, it does have that in it.
I'm curious why a mobster would keep a diary, though. Personally.
It's not a diary per se. It's
Okay.
basically his view going round following our characters during that campaign. So from the
Alright,
very
okay.
start, he was actually already following us.
Yep, it's essentially what was Seamus up to during the time that you had glimpses of him. So you guys obviously were investigating the unusual deaths on the campus
Mm-hmm.
at the same time as Seamus was. Seamus for his own reasons, but essentially Saisie has written this as Seamus's perspective. So why was he there? What was he doing during the sections that you were playing through, etc.
Kind of how he saw our characters as well, because at the time he doesn't really know our characters very well.
I definitely did not make a good first impression there.
No, you did not. And I've kind of made that clear that
random
Seamus didn't like you. The little wave and Seamus being like, fuck?
I stand by that action.
What genre would you say that What Remains of the Black is in?
Personally speaking, I'd say it is somewhere in a kind of slice of life story, but with a twist. That's my kind of perspective of it. Because it's a massive amount of focus on the characters and their personalities, about all these different interactions between them just going through their daily lives after the events of None More Black.
Yeah.
But then the build up towards the end where everything starts to kick off is like a huge kind of twist on it.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I felt the same. It very much kind of felt like everyone had their own kind of dedicated character study, but as we were saying, there's enough happening in the background to keep things moving and kind of keep you, well, I suppose not to do the kind of cliche thing of like, oh, you can't put it down, but it does like make you want to kind of keep going and seeing what happens next.
Yeah, I feel like especially Theo's character is the one that really drives the plot. So everyone is obviously having their own little stories, which could be taken at any point realistically. But I feel Theo's story was the one that sort of drove the plot.
Theo's stuff was probably some of my favourite stuff that you'd written throughout it. I don't know if that counts as a genre, but I would have described his stuff as more of a mysteries.
yep.
Like a
Mystery is definitely a
detective
genre.
kind of thing almost.
Yeah.
definitely.
But on the other hand, like William would have had more of a light-hearted slapstick comedy.
Yeah, yeah.
And Agnes and Seamus is more on the romance side of things, if that makes sense.
And then sort of Nigel's is a sort of like a psychological horror almost. To be honest, is the best way to describe Nigel's one.
Poor Nigel.
Yeah, poor Nigel. But that was how Nigel was how you introduced the book. So
How did you feel about it being introduced, with it being Nigel? Obviously, the very start of it, the very first few pages, is from when we were actually in the campaign, before we had our last sort of battle.
Mm.
Do you think that was good to start it from there? We're showing that awkward moment of Nigel coming home to his wife.
Yeah. So just to maybe explain that a bit further, we suddenly realised partway through one of our sessions that I'd written Nigel as having a wife, and we suddenly realised partway through the session Nigel hasn't gone home in 3 days.
oh yeah,
He didn't even contact her or let her know.
He didn't do anything. So we had this funny side gag that Nigel had just not gone home, and he went home like the day before it. He was worried he might not get back because is Nigel the oldest in the group? I can't remember.
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Nigel is, yeah.
he's a bit more world weary and things. What was that, Napa?
That's like a real cheery character.
Yeah.
I would say, yeah, he's a bit like that.
I think Nigel can be a bit comic relief sometimes
Yes.
as well.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like, I like to have a little bit of naughtiness from Nigel every now and then, that he's, you know, he's not the jokey kind of type, but every now and then he comes out with something that is a little bit cheeky, a little bit mischievous,
Yeah.
which I feel
I
like
like-
is perfect for him.
I like the way that you've done that in the story and the way that it kind of connects in with Fluffy's personality when we've been playing the game.
Yes.
Because throughout the game, whenever I've been narrating a section or I've been introducing a new concept, there's been points where Fluffy will come out with just a random gag from Nigel's perspective, completely in character.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly what it was, but there was a point where I brought up something. I think it was to do with the fact that the black was a new drug that had hit the scene or something, and Fluffy suddenly comes out with a random gag of, ah yes, I remember my times in the opium dens in India. But completely in character, in her character's voice, which was fantastic. And I feel like that's been part of what's inspired you with that naughty side of Nigel.
Yes, I have to admit, I loved Fluffy's role-playing of Nigel, and literally every time I'm about to write something with Nigel, I think, how is Fluffy going to pull this off? Is she going to be cheeky? Is she going to be, you know what I mean? Like, I just think, how is she going to word this? And I feel like it really, really inspired me to write Nigel, and he was so fun to write because of that.
Yeah, because I mean, the whole inspiration for Nigel was a professor who wants to be Indiana Jones type, but isn't.
Yeah.
Like that was the whole inspiration for him. So
No, he's pretty close.
yeah, it's
It's pretty,
surprisingly tough. So
That's
He's
one of the
tougher than
things.
he thinks.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things I feel like gets overlooked about Nigel quite often. I mean, as far as game mechanics go, Nigel's actually one of the stronger people in the group.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
memories of him taking a suit of armor, sword and
Oh,
shield.
dear Lord, yeah.
In the night. Yeah.
what I feel is one of the best things about Nigel, though, is 100% from the get-go. So from session number 1, very first time we played the game, Nigel was kind of a fully fleshed out character from the start.
Yeah.
And it's all down to Fluffy's portrayal of the character and immediately just switching into character.
Yes.
I mean, I feel like that helped to break the ice perfectly.
I feel like that because I know personally myself, when I created Agnes, I wasn't really too sure what I wanted to do with her. I was like, yeah, she's a teenager, but she's maybe a little bit mischievous and she's curious and a little bit annoying. But when Fluffy just went straight into it, it was like, oh wow, I need to keep up because she's doing better than me.
It's a bit of sibling rivalry.
Yeah, exactly. So we've obviously discussed a little bit into this, but I just want to see what are your thoughts on your characters within the story. So Levenlock, how do you feel about William in the story?
I mean, he's hella clumsy and doesn't think a lot of things through. For example, does not realize when he's left the safety off his gun.
Yes.
It pains me to say that so much.
The funny thing was, when I had written the first part, when obviously he threw the gun when his safety was off,
Mm-hmm.
and then he put it in a pocket, I forgot about that until later in the
Yeah.
story. And when I was writing that scene, I was like, oh, this would be perfect.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. He's not very socially aware. So again, for example, he walks in on Agnes Seamus and is like, oh, hey, how's it going? Can I join you?
Yeah, and they're not really having a date, but they're sort of
Yeah.
trying to, and then he sort of comes in and sits right next to Seamus, who does not like him.
No, he doesn't like. Seamus does not like him, and I don't think William notices that
Yeah.
at all, which is very me.
Do you feel though that he still is a believable character?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because I've found myself doing half the shit that he's done.
I feel like, sorry to interrupt, but I feel like Saisie's portrayal of William is spot on from how you were playing the character, Lev. Like,
Yeah.
I genuinely feel like she's captured the essence of the character perfectly.
Absolutely. Even just down to switching the light off without thinking about it.
Yeah. One of the things I did try to do with him though, which is something again I kind of got from your personality, despite all of his clumsiness, his social unawareness, I always made him still quite a positive person, always trying to help everyone, even if he's maybe not very good at it.
Or completely abysmal, actually, let's face it.
Yeah. But he always wanted to help. Always the one bringing the group together sometimes when they were a bit split up. Like when the guys find out about Agnes and Seamus's relationship, and William's the one that's bringing them together again.
Sits down in front of her. Are you two dating?
Yeah, exactly. I just felt like it was a great way of showing, first of all, obviously William's clumsiness again,
Yes.
But in a way that he's also moving forward with this. He's like, right, this is going to be clumsy no matter what. I'm just going to do this. Are you two going out? Fluffy. I know
Yeah.
obviously that you've not read fully the story yet, which that's fine, don't worry.
Life getting in the way.
Life gets in the way, it's fine. We're in a horrible time of the year, so it's fine.
Christmas.
But how do you feel about Nigel so far from what you have read?
I think you're again like the others. You're pretty spot on because sadly I've only really been able to read chapter one, but just like he comes in, as I say, like he's very world weary and things, and then obviously the next night when he comes back and they've succeeded in getting rid of the black and things like that, and he's all joyful and happy and things, and then proceeds to instantly collapse.
Exactly, because
Yeah,
he's so exhausted.
he's just an exhausted old man. And this is a young person's game he's kind of gotten into.
Yeah. How do you feel about Theo? Because obviously, I don't know if everyone else will agree with me on this. I personally feel that Theo is the protagonist of the story.
Oh, absolutely.
I would agree.
I think
Yeah.
it's an interesting one for me because like obviously this is my first ever like role playing game that I've ever been a part of, so it's all entirely new to me. So where you maybe had a bit of experience of okay, here's how to kind of think about your background, and of course, Guru, you gave me a lot of help with regards to the character sheet. But really going in, it was just a case of my whole idea for Theo was just to kind of ease myself into the process and just kind of think like just be along for the ride and contribute as much as you can when you can.
Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of the whole mindset that I've tried to keep running through Theo, like regardless of how kind of like more comfortable I get with the game process as a whole. I think that my idea, I would just want to keep that consistent where Theo's just the character that, you know, just there, tries to kind of keep everyone up and running and tries to contribute whatever and whenever he can. And I think that's really captured really well in your stories. But what I also liked about Theo in particular was the fact when we were kind of talking about character studies is where I actually kind of go into depth into the actually all isn't quite as well as it looks. I really kind of liked that aspect of the story because it was something that I myself never personally considered. But when you kind of look at it for the wider context, it makes a lot of sense. So that kind of made me enjoy the story a bit more because I could almost kind of take that back step almost.
These are things I feel like they can be a kind of perfect reflection of how the game system itself kind of influences them, and I think it's fantastic that you've even gone as far as doing that in the stories as well as part of their character development. I have a question on regards to that, sorry, just one little thing, and it's a question for Warden and for Leb. How do you two feel about Theo and William's kind of budding bromance throughout the story?
See, I quite like it, but at the same time, like Theo is trying to be friends with quite a few. I was trying to be friends with quite a few of the characters, but I quite liked the scenes where like Theo and William are together. For example, I was actually that might have been in game, that might not have been in the story. Was when they investigated that extra warehouse where the homeless were about.
That was in game. Well, actually, no, there was two. There was one in game and there was one in the story because they went together to investigate that.
Okay, I wasn't sure which. I knew it was one of them. It was, but no, I quite like that scene where it was Theo helped William out, and then William. But then you had earlier when William had to ask Theo, "Could you teach me how to shoot a gun?"
And
Although
then Theo getting angered at William because he's trying to shoot his glass.
And I felt quite bad for Theo actually when what was it when William's asking Seamus for help. And I felt bad for Seamus when he found out about that. No, I felt bad for Theo when he found out about that.
Yeah, because it was this whole kind of build-up that was happening between William and Theo. Then all of a sudden he's then asking Seamus instead. Even though Theo told him to do it.
It was Theo's idea, but I felt so bad for Theo.
What do you have to say about that, Warden?
Yeah, I was going to say I kind of like how kind of if you read between the lines, it kind of matches up where actually Theo's a bit of a kind of a lonely character, I guess, in the sense of kind of returning from the war, losing a loved one as a kind of direct result, and then kind of the group that he's in at the moment, the kind of detective team, up until maybe Seamus and Sam came along, certainly in the early stories, William was probably the closest in terms of the kind of mindset and like the closest match in terms of what a friend would be from that group.
Yeah.
So like granted everyone was all kind of friendly, all kind of good friends that way. But I think kind of the biggest connection probably could have been made with William, and I think like some of the kind of character weaknesses kind of balanced each other out between the two of them. So it was kind of quite cool to sort of see like William was supporting Theo in ways and vice versa. Yeah, it was quite interesting. But yeah, obviously that kind of carries on as the story progresses. But I'll keep it spoiler free.
So, what are your thoughts on the story as a whole? You know, is there something that you feel should need improvement? Something that you feel has been done well? Just what is your general sort of thoughts on the story? And Nap, I feel like you can answer this one since you've not been able to talk very much.
Well, I know for myself, obviously coming in later on down the lines, as it were, and not knowing anything about what happened in the story itself, I found it left enough to the imagination of going, what did they deal with?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you still had an element, like you weren't lost in the story. Like it wasn't a case of I don't understand what any of this is. You know, it was very engaging on that level, which was good for me personally.
What about yourself, Fluffy?
Yeah, obviously, as I say, unfortunately, I haven't read all of it, so I can't, fully kind of give an answer to you. But even just as the small bit I have read, it does very much. It's very much a sort of like nice little hint, and it's clear that whatever this thing that they're referencing, for one thing, they all respond very differently as well, which is really good. Like they all respond kind of how their characters would and things. So it almost seems like like when you first kind of go through it, and then it's like Nigel's again, just going to Nigel's response, where he's like all happy, like initially he's very worried about it, and then he comes back and he's ecstatic, but he collapses. It's quite interesting, and then Theo as well. He kind of like says, "Oh, I just want to go up and lie down," and then he's like, "Actually, come here, Butler," whose name I've suddenly forgotten.
Claude, I think.
Claude, that's
yep.
it, Claude.
I like Claude.
Yeah. Come here and talk to me about this horrible thing.
Yeah, he's sort of a bit
I
restless.
don't want food. Just come and talk to me.
Yeah,
I
he's
need
sort
to
of
parse what I have seen.
he's sort of so freaked out by what he's seen, he doesn't really know what he wants to do with himself. So he brings his
Yeah.
poor butler in and is like, "Come talk to me about this thing. You have no idea what I'm talking about."
See, I like that scene just for the sake of it does show that Theo doesn't have at that point a lot of friends, or as it then it does show that he's not got a wife anymore and stuff like that. And it was like it made me kind of feel quite bad for the character, but even worse for Claude, who again, as you said, had no idea what the heck was going on.
Aye. He's just sitting there timidly, like, "Can I get you something, sir?"
No, I want to converse.
Yeah, and Theo's also showing this aggression, which is something that I then didn't show really any other time throughout the story. So it was also to show just how freaked out he was from it, that he gave this very aggressive response to Claude, and then the rest of it he's quite timid. He's confident, but he's really timid.
like that's in itself just made me think. Like I feel like Claude's seen some stuff from Theo. Yeah.
Don't read into that.
Oh, I did not mean it like that. Just I want to say that right now.
Too late.
Oh.
I have actually had a few things coming back with Claude and Theo and Theo and his butlers.
Oh, I can't wait to read that.
there's been a few things which has been great fun to write.
I think in that regard, one of my favourite things is that you've continued on the tradition of Theo forgetting the butler's name.
Yes.
Yep.
I
Wait,
included
what?
that. I included that.
Okay, fair
And
enough.
it was a bonding moment between Seamus and Theo later on in some stories. When he's forgetting his butler's name. But Seamus knows the butler's name, even though he's never met him. He's like,
okay.
wait, your butler's name is this. Which is just
I mean,
really great.
If I was to defend myself, I would say that the butler wasn't part of the original character. It was only once things had been fully established, it was like, hey, Warden, did you know that you're rich enough to have a butler? I was like, oh, okay, sweet.
Yeah, I remember that. We didn't. It was a while later, and that's when we find out as well that William shouldn't have had a car.
Yes.
And then I dealt
Get
with that
that
nicely in
repoed.
the story.
So that's my bad in that regard. Like I said, by that point I was still relatively new game master. You know, I didn't really know the full ins and outs of the game yet, and I was sat one night having a look at the rules for credit ratings for the characters and realised, oh, I have been doing this completely wrong this entire time. Oh dear. About 4 of these characters should not have the things they have. But on the plus side, Theo's a freaking millionaire.
that was great for me reading Theo's first part when he came home, because I knew he had money, but it was when there was a big house and a butler, and I'm sitting there going, what?
Yeah, that's why I included that within the story when William's like, "This is your house," and then he's like, "And Agnes knew, and we still slept on my floor."
Yeah. Why didn't we stay at Theo's?
I have to say, on that session, that did not go the way I expected it to in the slightest. Because I thought if anyone was going to try the black, it was going to be William.
Mm-hmm.
And then for Theo to be the one to actually go through with it, that was a bit out there. It kind of shows more of Theo's personality as well, because we have that whole running joke of team science. And it's a case of that he tried it for the greater good, for a kind of medical curiosity type side of things, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel like you then managed to bring that into his character later as well.
Mm-hmm. It's actually something that I've still got as a running sort of kind of gag as well. It's mentioned every now and then, the whole team science thing.
Yeah, I saw that.
But even like in the later stories, I still have them mentioning it when they're like, "But we should really bring along the actual scientist with us if we're going to be team
Absolutely.
science." You know. But just in reference to the whole thing of Theo obviously being rich, having this huge house, but he decides to come to Williams, even though he knows it's not a shithole or anything
It's
like
a
that.
bookshop.
Yeah, it's a bookshop basically. he sleeps in a bookshop, but he's still. It's also again to show his sort of loneliness and his desperation for friendship. That he'll go to someone's house to sleep over, even if it's in a small building, even if it's not a comfortable bed.
Yeah, you wonder if that maybe just feels more real, as opposed to the luxurious setting.
Yeah, well, he's hardly really seen much of his luxury setting, has he? Really, because he's obviously been in the war, and then he's had obviously the adventures where he's basically stayed over at Williams anyway because he lives so far away. So
It makes me wonder what Claude gets up to when Theo's not there. Now that I think about
Massive
it.
house parties.
Is it like a Fresh Prince of Bel-Air situation?
I had that
That's right.
exact same thought just now. I already had that picture in my mind. I was like, yep, nailed it.
Sorry for my laugh, by the way.
Going back to what you were saying, Saisie, about like the parts of the story that we think are favourite parts, essentially. Overall, for me, it's the characters and the way that you've written them.
Yeah.
Because I feel like the dialogue between them, the kind of in-jokes that they have, the moments where they're sarcastic to each other, etc., all feels very real. And
Yeah.
it feels like a genuine conversation between people. You know, that's probably my favourite part of the story.
I guess
It's
like an
just-
example would be the bit when it was William and Theo in the garden and they say a woman's not going to fall out of the sky, and then they both look up immediately.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know? I guess that's a good example of that kind of thing where, I mean, they're ridiculous looking up because there's nothing there. But,
Clouds are there.
yeah, but it's a very kind of real conversation after what they've experienced as well. Or I feel like it
Especially
is.
with people having dropped from the sky in front of them before.
What do you think of the sort of horror element in the story? Now, obviously, this one lightly dabs into horror. It's not hugely, obviously fluffy. As I said, you've not been able to witness too much, but you've seen how they sort of react to the previous horror.
Yeah.
But how do you feel about the horror element? Do you feel like there's enough to it? Obviously, as I said, this is like the first story, so it's not too great or anything, but do you feel like there is enough of the horror element within it?
What what I feel with it is your first story is very subtle with the horror, but it's still present throughout it. Because the characters, a lot of what they're going through with it, they're all caught up in their own stories, their own lives, etc., to the point that they're not noticing what's developing around them. So, take for example with Theo. Theo's story is the one that is closest to the actual horror.
Yeah.
And it's a case of that the majority of it is him dealing with his decisions that he's made and his kind of conscience towards it up to that point. And of course, it then all comes to a head when it comes back to haunt him even more.
Yeah.
So I feel like you've done the build-up with that fantastically. Like, even the kind of subtle scenes where Agnes is in the library and she feels like she's being watched, I feel like it's a kind of suspenseful horror, as opposed to on-the-nose kind of terrifying creatures, etc., in front of them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Although, does that mean the rest of my stories aren't great because there's terrifying creatures?
No, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that at all. I do agree with Guru because apart from that, I don't read a lot of horrors. So I had to reread a large part of the story to, again, it's just more from my own stupidity to figure out which parts were horrors. But as you said, Theo's the closest one there to it.
Yeah.
With him and his addiction. Like it hooked me into Theo's storyline when he went to bed and clutched his head and screamed. A lot of time, like for example, when he goes back to the warehouse and he's like, "Oh, was this stuff here before or not? Sorry, they had these things before in their hands." Blah 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 blah. And that grabbed my attention a lot, which is more of, as much as Guru said, I think some more I would describe it as a psychological suspenseful horror, psychological horror, as I kept trying to call it.
That's what I would say as well.
Yeah.
Because not to say that because it's suspenseful, etc., or a kind of a slower burn on the horror side of things, that it's not as good as other horror, for example. What I feel like is this really works for this first story.
Yes.
Because this first story, I don't feel it is about the horror. It is about the characters
100%.
And the world building.
And the world building to begin with. This is essentially your introduction to this world that you've created. So I feel like the amount of horror that you have in it, even with it just being subtle or mostly in the characters' heads, as it were, is perfect for this first story. Because it really sets the scene for things later on. I mean, obviously I've got insider knowledge here, but some of your later stories, when you come down to them and you compare them to your first story, you can see clearly from that first story through to the second, third, fourth, etc., how it's evolved to the point it's at and how the characters have evolved. So I feel like having this kind of slow build up in this first story is absolutely perfect for what you needed it to be.
Oh yeah, because it definitely, as Guru said, there, it sets it up for the future stories where they are a lot more things are happening, but you're still getting little extra glimpses into the characters. So you're still learning more about the characters, but this one greatly, with not being a part of the first few sessions, for me, Leb's character of, William, who I knew nothing about from a gaming mechanic, I still have a great idea of who he is as a character in the story.
I mean, basically, as she's written it, it's perfect for me.
Especially for Napa, because obviously yourself, you come in later, the second story, which hopefully I'm going to have it soon, but I don't know quite when.
I can't wait to read.
So the second story is a much larger cast, because obviously there's yourself, there's the other two characters that obviously that we know of as well who get added, and they sort of come in, and there's that element of still trying to keep the sort of the characterization of the first story, but then there's an advancement of horror in the second one, and I think that was kind of.
I feel like with your second story, it's almost like the opposite horror-wise from your first story, but in a fantastic way. Because with the first story, you have that kind of slow build-up that's going on in the background. In your second story, the characters don't know what's happening until it's too late.
Yeah.
Which I think was a fantastic twist on it. Because if anyone has read your first story and has looked into it like, okay, cool, so it's about these characters and the situations that they're going through, about their kind of their bonds with each other, and then they go into the second story and read it, and all of a sudden everything hits the fan.
Yeah.
The extreme it goes to, though, is what I think is what is most impressive with it, because that is what I feel sets the tone for your later stories.
Yeah.
Because this first story, it's the subtlety of, well, the real monster in it is humans, whereas in the second one it's monsters.
Yeah. Yeah.
The humans with the real monsters all along until the real monsters come.
Oh yes.
And then Cthulhu.
I know obviously we are discussing a little bit of the second story, but it's just to sort of touch on obviously that going forward. But I feel like it is quite a difference between the first story and the second one. Is it too much of a jump though?
I don't feel it is. I feel like it is exactly what it needed to be. Because one thing that with your first story is, as I said, it's kind of a slow burn. Whereas the second story, it has a lot more to it character-wise as the kind of build-up. And there are, without going into too much about it for spoiler side of things, etc., there are a fair few red flags that pop up during their conversations, etc., about where the story is going.
Yeah.
That at first, if you're out of the loop with it, you're not going to realize what they're referring to. And it's a good way of showing that the characters themselves have tried to put things behind them and have tried to move on, only for it to come back to the forefront again.
Yeah.
So I feel like, again, without going too much into it, I feel like the second story is exactly what you needed to kind of open things back up into the kind of wider cosmic horror kind of element of the game coming into your stories.
Another question I have, and without trying to be biased, who is your favourite character of the first story?
Unseen Pedestrian number 2. I thought they had a really strong role in it.
So who, seriously speaking now, who would you consider to be your favourite character then? Or who do you feel was the best character in it?
For me personally, I thought Theo was a solid standout for me, because he's got that much that he's like dealing with and processing. I think he's just got a little bit more going on, like within himself, that a lot of the rest of the group don't know about.
Yeah.
So I think that for me personally, that's the one that stood out.
For me, it was almost like a combo between Nigel and William.
Yeah.
I want to say Nigel purely because we were in the kind of university setting, which is kind of Nigel's stomping ground. So we were almost kind of seeing like Nigel trying to rule the roost in some areas. And obviously, as we were kind of saying before, a lot of Nigel's character comes from how well Emily was role playing and kind of already giving you such a clear image of what Nigel was, and the kind of story was backing that up. And then I think William as well, just for the kind of purely comedic factor, in the sense of like he was the comedic relief, but also endearing with you could see what he was trying to do, and obviously achieving it in some places, not achieving it in others. So it was almost kind of like the kind of the grounding part of it for me,
Yeah.
which I thought was quite cool. Like while everyone else was going on kind of wild bits of lore or kind of going really in depth into a particular theme, William was just there to kind of like bring it back to reality and kind of understand that, okay, this is actually just a story about folk going on about their lives. And I think a little bit came through with Nigel with that, because obviously had to continue on with his teaching. But yeah.
I would probably agree with that, to be honest. I did really like William. Like, I feel like I should probably say Seamus, but I did really like William.
You hide it well.
Do I?
Can I just say how happy it's made me to hear that William got mentioned for this category?
Yeah.
So
Back of the net.
I've got to say, from my perspective, obviously, for me, I don't have the same kind of bias as some of you might have towards your own characters, if it makes sense, because I don't have my own character to an extent. I know that obviously Seamus was inspired by my performance essentially as the character. However, I have to say my favourite character from the story is probably William as well. I absolutely love the kind of the comedic elements that he brings to the story, but while he's still trying to do his best by everyone else. You know? Like the scene where he accidentally uncovers the photograph that Seamus has taken,
Yeah.
and proceeds to do everything within his power to try and stop Seamus, despite the fact he is completely outclassed by the man, was fantastic. Only for it to then change to be the dynamic of, well, now they're trying to be friends, you know,
Yeah.
and with them
Yeah.
going to the speakeasy together.
Oh, I love the speakeasy.
That is probably my favourite scene in the whole story.
Yeah.
Just for, as we haven't touched on it at this point, during the events of that scenario, the None More Black scenario, William kind of had an accident wherein he became deathly afraid of alcohol.
Yes.
So to have him brought into a speakeasy by Seamus, who's none the wiser, was just comedic gold for me.
Yeah,
Like,
I felt like it was brilliant, but it was brilliant, the build up, even just going to the speakeasy, the fact that he goes to Nigel's first, and Nigel's like,
Yeah.
do you realise where you're going, right?
Yeah.
You know, and the whole thing that William's trying to obviously act like Seamus as well, because he's trying to, you know, he's trying to be cool, he's trying to be like Seamus.
He's trying to be a ladies' man, yes.
Yes, and obviously, like Nigel gets to witness this spectacular sort of performance of William even up to the speakeasy bit,
Like,
which was so much fun to write because he can't
Can-
even stand still. You know.
I will say it was so much fun to read as well, because again, I'm reading this and I am William. I'm sitting there going, if this was Pathfinder, he's rolled a 1 in his perform check every point of the way for the last few instances.
Yeah, because he even had like I was thinking, how would Seamus probably walk? And I was thinking, if he was trying to tell William how to do it, how would William walk? And I've got him flailing his arm out, trying to do something with it, you know?
Yeah, I'm reading that and I'm sitting there going, flailing his arm? What the fuck does that mean? And I'm sitting there reading it, trying to imitate, like, what does flailing an arm mean?
Well,
I only had one image in my head when I read that bit, and it's purely because I watch far too much wrestling, and it's what I call the Vince McMahon swagger walk, because his arms just proper flail about.
Okay.
It's worth looking up. You'll see what I mean. But
I had in my head like one hand in the pocket and like the your
Yes.
dominant hand in the pocket, and
Yeah.
the non one just kind of swinging back and forth, and you're like,
Yeah,
and
that
I'm
was
sitting
kind
there going,
of my imagery of it, but that's how I wanted to paint of it. I wanted to say that he was flailing his arm, because you're like, what the hell is he doing with his arm? You know what I mean?
but again, I'm William, and I'm sitting there going, even I'm cringing at this. No wonder Seamus and Agnes are.
On that subject, so I have to say, my second favourite character, it's going to come as no surprises, is Seamus. Because
Same here.
what
Shocking.
I absolutely love about it is, with the other characters, you had a good kind of starting point for each of them based off of all the other players from the game. And the fact that they had brought real life into the character, but they had written their own backstories and backgrounds, etc., for the characters, which obviously you then expanded upon. With Seamus was a completely blank slate. So the only thing you had to base him off of him was the fact that I had done a horrendous Irish accent, managed to
I loved
play
your
the
accent.
I've
thought it
never
was
been able
good.
to recreate it. I've never been able to recreate it. But then to have him go from being, yes, he's this character who was a self-proclaimed arsonist who loves being an arsonist, to then have him come back into it purely based off of one action that he took during the whole scenario, where he came running to help the rest of the players when he could have just left them for dead.
Yeah.
Apart
I
from
feel
William,
like,
who ran off for a bucket.
apart from
Yeah.
William, who just ran up for a bucket, yeah. But I feel like what you've managed to do with the character, you have managed to flesh him out into something completely new, which has taken off into a direction that I didn't expect for an NPC who was essentially just a throwaway NPC who's now become a major part
Yeah.
of your stories. I absolutely love that.
Yeah, I mean, even like the later ones, I think he's probably developing into the main character. Like,
Oh,
maybe.
he's got a big wall to go against for Theo then.
Well, there's a
Well,
lot of.
It's for their own spin-off that's going to happen. The Adventures of Seamus and Theo.
That would be good.
That'd be amazing, yeah.
It'll be good. Curious to see like where things do go with Seamus next. Obviously, again, I already know, but I'm curious to see how it develops even further from there. So
Well, there is actually.
everyone's in for a treat. That's the question I have for you, Susie.
What's that?
So, in regards to the campaign,
Mhm.
obviously because the way that this has been set up, we jumped immediately from that first scenario of Servants of the Lake into None More Black, into Mr. Corbett, and now into Masks of Nyarlathotep.
Well, no, we were in Mask of Nyla. Can't I say it? Mr. Tep.
Nyarlathotep.
Yeah, that. We were in that
So-
first, and then we had the break, and then had Mr. Corbett.
Yeah,
Yes,
you had like the
so-
prologue.
Yeah, so essentially what I'm trying to say is, because obviously we already know where the characters are going to end up, how has that been for you with trying to work things with a limited kind of time scale?
It's a little bit difficult. So, like at first, I wasn't really expecting to write this many stories. I mean, I'm on the 7th right now, and I have an 8th in mind. Realistically, I was only going to write this first story, and then when we did Peru for the campaign,
Haru was good, by the way.
it was. I was going to write a short thing where it was going to be Agnes's letters to Seamus while they're away, but it eventually turned into another story again, the second story. And then once I'd written that second story, I then had an idea to make up my own cult, my own sort of campaign. You know, so like the second one still has elements of our campaigns, but the third one forward is all things that I've made up myself. And I try to make them all squeeze into the time between our Mr. Corbett campaign and the next part of our campaign. But I've been trying to squeeze them all into this sort of time period. And now that I'm getting to the point where they are going to be now in the campaign, that's why first of all I'm doing a spin-off, so it gives me another thing that I can still keep writing. But I don't know what to do after that. I'm thinking, because obviously it depends with how we do our campaign, I'm thinking I might need to do a sort of alternative reality thing where I'll just say that we did a campaign, we're all alive, and then go from there.
That was one thing I was going to bring up. Obviously, the characters, they are based off of our characters and stories that we've experienced from our Call of Cthulhu sessions, but I can't stress enough, they are not the sessions. And
No.
I want to make that clear there. So even if you wanted to, Saisie, you could even completely ignore what is happening in the campaign and continue writing on stories about the characters. It's not going to affect what's happening in our game, just like the game is not going to affect you.
Yeah.
So,
well,
yeah.
The thing is, I've tried to always link what's happened in the game to what's happened in the story. There's only been one thing that's happened in the game that was different from the story, and that was that William didn't give Agnes the book. That's the only thing. Every other little bit of detail has been implemented in the stories.
Yeah.
And they've always been to do with the game, you know, they always link back to the game. You know, a small thing happens in that, and I continue on in the story. That's kind of how I've kind of kept that. And even for example, in using the stories, I've used them to then also develop characters going forward, like people's names changing and things.
That is something I have enjoyed with it, because you had written your first couple of stories before we had reached a certain point in the tabletop game. It has had direct impacts and direct consequences on the game itself.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, names changing.
There's been other things as well, like William's gun handling goes up thanks to my first story.
True.
And other things as well, like people's backstories changing, you know?
Yeah.
Quite a few people's backstories technically have changed. If people
I
want
would
to add
say
them.
have more been fleshed out than changed.
Yeah.
Enhanced is what I would say.
Added to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Expanded upon.
Yeah.
Etc.
I like etc. better. That's just me. I'm a simple person.
So, I don't really have any more questions left. I can't think of any other ones to ask. Obviously, Guru, you've just given me quite a good questionnaire, but is there any other questions that you have either for each other or for me?
I have one for you, which is, how do you go about making the side characters? Like, for example, you've got Mary, Claude, and Charles.
Dorothy.
Off the top of my head. Dorothy, yes.
Yep.
Or there was it Dolores is in the
No,
Joe's
Dolores
diner?
was part of. No, Dorothy was in a diner. Dolores is Nigel's wife.
Right, okay, I got those two
Yeah.
mixed up.
Yep.
As long as
Basically,
Nigel doesn't get mixed up.
I hope not. William got a date with one of them at the end of the first one.
that would be worrying.
William's an open person.
The funny thing is, I think I've made a side character for every story. Like, I've even gone so far as made side characters and then turned them into more than just side characters. Like, in the second story, there's 3 characters that are introduced, and then they become a bigger part of the stories. But realistically, what I do to come up with these characters, I go, I feel like I need a person in here. I'm going to give them a name. And then I Google popular names in America or
okay, right.
something like that.
Fair enough, yeah.
Or I'll say, you know what? This sounds like a good name. I'm going to use that name. That's really how I do it, except for there's some names that I do put in specifically.
Your more recent stories, you've really begun to develop as a writer when it
Yeah.
comes to that side of things. So your writing style, I've always loved it as being almost 100% about the characters. But now you're starting to get to the point where I've seen you drawing out maps of places to help you to describe them further. I've seen your description of horrible events that have happened, and it's had me gripped and on the edge of my seat while I've been reading it. So
Please, for the love of God, put those maps on Patreon.
Oh God, it's literally. Do you want to know how I've drawn this? I've got a Sudoku book, and I've on the opening page, I've literally drawn it on the cover.
I love it.
But I can redraw it. put it on Patreon
No,
because I was.
Hey, come up to mine. I've got a scanner. We'll just scan it on.
Absolutely,
Oh, God.
as is.
Oh God, that would
Alternatively,
be horrific.
if you
But
want to use my dungeon drafter, you can use it instead.
I might do.
I've got the advantage of that because I live with you and you need a kind of someone to bounce ideas off of. I get to read these way in advance, so
Yeah.
go me.
I'm kind of jealous.
No, Guru reads them in the terrible state where I'll write them as plainly as possible, like Seamus walked into a room, scary stuff happened. You know what I mean? In a really terrible state that they're just atrocious.
It's more a case of that Saisie will write a chapter and she will be like, I want to know if this is good, and I suddenly get shouted through from the other room.
Yeah.
Okay.
That is basically
So
it.
I get to read them first, but I don't get to read the chapters in order.
Yeah, sometimes it's sort
Okay.
of.
So I absolutely love that you have these pivotal moments in your stories where that happens.
I had a question for you around about what or who do you find the most kind of trickiest to write about, and I'll elaborate in the sense of are there any characters that you kind of think you spend the most time like mulling over, is this how they would kind of react, or is there any kind of situations that you maybe kind of refer to other kind of pieces of information, or like kind of refer back to how it was played in the game itself, or
Yeah, so
just
I've
kind of
got
try and
like.
put your
I have little paragraphs which I refer back to if I try and think of how your characters might speak. I feel Nigel's not the trickiest, but Nigel I have to really think when I'm about to write about him because I know when he's going to speak. That's fine. I can get that down fine. It's the wording. And sometimes I have to read it out loud, and I have to hear Fluffy's voice in my head to hear if it's a good enough line or not. I wouldn't say he's the hardest to write.
But he's a challenge.
A challenge, a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
I would actually also say probably Agnes is one of the more difficult ones to write about as well. Simply because in the first story, I wanted to make her an annoying little teenager. You know, she wasn't supposed to be. No one was realistically supposed to be a hugely likable kind of person. You know, everybody was supposed to have their flaws. That's how I kind of wanted everyone to be, because I see that as what humans are like. One's like that. But there's good parts of everyone. So I tried to make her a little bit more annoying, a bit naive, you know, ignorant. As the stories progress going forward, she's matured, but I'm still trying to keep a little bit of that in. So she's probably even though she's my character, she's probably the more difficult one to write with, along with the other character that I mentioned.
See, Agnes is probably one of my favorite characters. She's not. I didn't list her in the favorite characters that I wrote down, but like you do portray that quite well, and I am looking forward to seeing how she develops as future stories go.
Yeah, well, she does sort of. She's also, I would say, one of the more tormented characters.
Oh yeah.
Like,
Definitely.
she's really tormented, especially in the later stories. She goes through quite a lot.
I mean, even just her scenes of she fantasizes about Seamus. I was sitting there going, "Is this some background work of background old god element thing that's going on?" And then, yeah.
Like it's something
she has a very good imagination.
Yeah,
Yes.
but I was.
Those little snippets are great. I love them.
Yeah, but
I had to reread the first Wild Carded twice because I wasn't sure what was going on.
Exactly. I had to read them a few times because I was sitting there going, either this is something to do with her taking the black, or she has a good imagination.
I
Well,
like that you've managed to blur that line though. That, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
I will say I was so happy when it was eventually she thought she was imagining it, and then
Yeah.
I was so bloody happy. Like I love their interaction. Sorry.
What I like with those characters, and with all the characters really, is that despite all the horrible things that they experience, you've managed to have these moments where they are purely happy, and I feel like that's what makes your characters more human as well, because they always seem to find that kind of light in the dark.
Like Nigel with his religion and his wife, and taking care of Agnes, and then there's Agnes with Seamus, and then there's William and Theo finding comfort in each other, because
And William's temporary comfort in Mary.
yes, his temporary comfort, which is then completely like breaks his heart.
My God, I hate Mary.
Well, that's you were
Plain and
supposed to.
simple. I get that, but my God.
I know it was really heartbreaking when I wrote this scene. Like, I have to admit, see some of the scenes I write, I sometimes tear up as I'm writing them because I try to think of how people are feeling in that moment.
Stacey, some of the scenes you've written, I've teared up at reading.
There's been times Guru has walked in and I'm tearing. I'm like, get out! I'm writing.
But Leb, on that subject, like, wait till you read some of the other stories.
I can't wait. I really can't. It's an emotional roller coaster, some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Personally speaking, I think I've always said this to Saisie, but I think her third story is probably my favourite one. I'm not going to touch on it just now, but what a roller coaster that one is.
Yeah.
So seriously, buckle up.
Like
that one is definitely.
I'm waiting to see how she. I don't know if she will. I don't know if you do write about it, but when I left the group, it's going to be bittersweet of reading how William leaves the story if that happens, and
I have touched on that in the second one, so you will see like what happens with that.
Like I tear up in anticipation.
It's a lovely. I feel like in the second one, what I've done with William is so lovely with what I've done with it, or that's what I wanted to do with it. I don't know if Napa or Guru will agree with what I've done with.
Yeah, I liked it.
What I like as well, though, and again, feel free with this one, Live, to tell me to go away or whatever, but the way that she's left it, the way that she's left it, your character can always return.
Yeah.
So you have that kind of flexibility with it. So yeah.
There's not a final nail in the coffin, as it were. There's
exactly.
William sometimes pops back in later stories as well. He's not a prominent character anymore, but he does pop into the stories every now and then. And sometimes he's a bit of a voice of reason, to be honest. Or
that's fair enough.
I'm
quite happy to hear that.
Which is quite funny to see, considering everything that happens in the first story. Even in the second one, when there's that sort of dampened depression following him, there's still that humour that's about William, which is what I wanted to show as well,
I'm happy to hear that.
I say especially when you introduce the other characters that he ends up spending some time with. So.
Yes,
is it Monica?
No.
Oh, thank God.
It's even worse.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
It's a great read, though.
Okay. Yeah. I'm glad it's not Monica. Actually, a tie for me between two characters, and it's Theo. And as much as I really want to hate him, Seamus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me why Seamus then, because obviously we heard it from Guru and myself.
Yeah, well, like everything else has been covered with Theo, but like he does, he does a lot to try and help the group. But as you've pointed out to me a few times, he doesn't know how to help. But I actually love his interactions with Agnes, just for the slow progression to the lovey-dovey stuff.
Yeah, the fact that he's sort of unsure of himself, kind of thing. So he's kind of fucking it up, to be honest.
Yeah, but again, I really want to hate him.
I think
I just can't.
I think, though, that's a testament to how well Saisie's written the character.
Absolutely.
Because, as you said, he's always there trying to help, but the things he does is despicable.
Yeah,
because
like paying a woman to be with William.
William didn't need to know.
But
William still doesn't know.
Exactly.
But I know, which is why I don't like him.
What I mean
again,
more, though, is, for example, taking the photo without Agnes's permission.
yes.
That's something that is absolutely horrible.
Mhm.
But to
And
him, he
yeah.
thought he was doing right. You know, it's something that, you know, he quite likes her, so that's why he's done that.
He
Absolutely.
romanticised the idea to himself.
Mhm.
But that speaks a lot about who Seamus is as a person. That he's somewhere on a kind of fine balance between being altruistic and being incredibly selfish.
Mhm.
And that's something that kind of you see a lot of from his character as the stories progress. I like that it's a kind of recurring theme with him. Quite rightly said, he's not a good guy, but he's not a bad guy.
Yeah.
Yes. So
It's
no, go on. Sorry.
that's me pretty much finished what I was trying to say.
So
But
I don't know what I'll be perfectly honest. I don't know what altruistic means. What I saw, because I remember he tears the photo, if memory serves.
Yes.
Now in my head it had Agnes's head where the tear was. I don't know about the rest of the photo, but it was Agnes's head up, because I was under the impression. What my impression of him was, he doesn't know when his job's gonna, well, kill him. So it was a scene that he wanted to remember exactly a point where he was happy, and it was mainly just seeing Agnes.
That's kind of how I actually portray Seamus as. That's kind of why the second story, there's a little bit of a rush in their relationship, because
Okay.
that is also kind of why he took the photograph as well. You know, because Agnes is actually the first woman he's loved, and
Aww.
that's why he wants something
Sorry.
to. That's why he wants something to remember her by. You know,
Mhm.
because as you said, he doesn't know when his job is going to take him out. He doesn't know.
Or take
when...
her out, even.
Yeah, exactly. With the stuff that he's seen that she puts up with, that's why. And in the later stories as well, there is still that theme there that both of them sort of feel like they could die at any moment, so they sort of try to use that
To their advantage.
Carpe diem.
Yeah.
That,
to
yes.
live in the moment.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's how I kind of have their characters together like that, you know. So that is why that whole photograph bit, that is why he has that, because it is his sort of way of, like, and he puts it in his wallet because it is his way of remembering her.
Mhm.
And yeah, you're right, it is from the head up, so it is just.
Okay, I'm glad I was.
Yeah, no, not the other part. No, the other part,
left
no.
to clarify for you, if you're altruistic, you are putting other people's well-being before your own.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
So he does do that every now and then, you know. That's why, like, in the end scene, why he does the more dangerous part, because he knows that he's going to be better at it. Like.
Oh yeah, I was very worried when in that last scene for that.
Because that's the thing
I'm trying not to give spoilers as well.
No, I know, I'm the
saying
same.
This.
That's kind of why that scene, I had it try to be as tense as it was, because the characters were still new to all this happening.
Mhm.
So it was a sort of a tense scene where they don't really know what they're doing, and it's still risky what they're doing. It's still dangerous, and they still get hurt going in there.
Oh yeah, very much so.
So.
That's another thing I wanted to touch on, the many injuries of many of the characters.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
Some characters kind of suffer a little bit more than others.
Repeated injuries.
Repeated injuries, yes.
Nappa, your character is not actually the worst.
This is true.
But yeah,
still.
that's something.
So who's the worst?
Spoilers.
All right, fair enough.
But that is something that I did want to include in my stories, though, is injuries, and actually something that I've started doing as well is researching up how they would be treated in that time, and first aid as well. So for Theo's character especially, there was one of the stories I had written, which I think is the one I've sent Nappa, the fourth one, where I did a whole load of research on how long things take to heal, what would happen if this happened, because I wanted to make these injuries happen to show that they're still human, they're still going to get hurt, and they're still going to almost die at times and things like that. But have them being able to recover, and then obviously they've got the great Doctor of Theo there to help them. And I feel like it also then gives me more that I can do with Theo as well, because there's even some points when he's telling others what to do, telling them to go get like blankets or something, or you know what I mean. He's telling them to get stuff to heal everyone, and it means that I can kind of bring a bit more of Theo out in those scenes as well, rather than just Theo works on this injured person.
It brings the character to life a bit more.
Yeah.
As well as the situation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I also feel like it makes the sort of dramatic scenes more intense. The fact is that there's real injuries happening, real stuff that's happening to characters. It's not just a tiny scratch on the arm or something. There's
It's
people,
life-changing in some situations.
Yeah, like people's arms getting broken, people's guts getting cut open, and things like that.
See, now that I think about it, that works a little bit with the interaction of William. Again, this is from a game perspective of William and Theo, because Theo clearly knows what he's doing. William does not.
I've quite enjoyed this, so hopefully we can try and see about doing a second one.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd happily do.
I look forward to reading the next story.
Good, I'm glad. I'm probably going to end this here then. I just want to thank you all for discussing this with me some ideas and thoughts of stories, characters, things like that. It helps me going forward as well. Thank you for all being here.
Thank you for having us.
No
Our pleasure.
Anytime.
Thank you.